Deputy Chief Justice Raymond Zondo officially got the state capture inquiry underway this week, starting with what could be a 2-year-long process to get to the bottom of allegations that large parts of the state fell under control of nefarious business interests, specifically those connected to the Gupta family. As the commission began its work, Zondo was candid about the need for cold, hard evidence-driven testimony to be given at the commission.
You know, the evidence is very important because whatever I may read in the newspapers, when I have to make findings, when I have to make recommendations, I can't base them on what I read in newspapers. I've got to base that on what I hear in evidence. Now, you are a member of the executive. You probably know a lot more than somebody like me and many people, members of the public, in terms of what was happening. And our terms of reference do require this commission to look at how deep did this phenomenon of state capture go, if indeed there was state capture. I say if indeed there was state capture because our terms of reference says these are allegations of state capture. We must investigate them and establish whether there was state capture, and in effect we must establish also how deep state capture went.
Jonas told the commission the Guptas claim they control high-level levers of government.
He said that, I quote, "You must understand that we are in control of everything," unquote. The National Prosecuting Authority, the Hawks, the National Intelligence Agency, and the old men do, and I quote, "will do anything we tell him to do." At the end of the meeting, Mr. Gupta repeated that they had information on me, and if I suggested that the meeting had occurred, they would kill me.
Well, to discuss the road the inquiry will take, Associate Editor at TISA Blackstar, Ranjeni Munusamy, and political analyst Lukhona Mnguni. Thank you so much for being with us on PolitBureau this Sunday morning. Let me start with you, Ranjeni. You were at the state capture inquiry for large parts of the week. Some jaw-dropping testimony by the former Deputy Finance Minister Mcebisi, Jonas.
Oh, absolutely. You know, no matter how many times you hear this testimony, particularly the death threat, it hits you in the gut because I think the full impact of what's happened and the audacity and brazenness of state capture comes through. And I think there was a series of really astounding revelations. And I think for me, one of the most jaw-dropping parts was what Jonas alleged was a deliberate attempt by the Hawks to sabotage this investigation. And I think that tells you, Nicholas, why at this stage, so many years later, with so much information in the public domain, there is no prosecution that's really properly underway, and nobody's being held to account.
Indeed, it would seem as though the Hawks may have suffered the same fate as the Scorpions, but at least not being as effective as they once were, the Scorpions, that is. Lukhona, let me bring you in here. Do you think that this testimony is going to stand up to cross-examination? Because a lot of people may misconstrue what the state capture inquiry is and what a judicial commission of inquiry is as well. It may have a lot of the powers of a court of law, but it's not necessarily going to fast-track the way to a conviction.
No, I mean, it's not going to fast-track, but it needs to at least gather enough evidence to create a clear picture of what is exactly at play. I mean, it's very difficult to then say Mcebisi Jonas must have as much evidence as possible about what happened when he visited Saxonwold. There doesn't seem to be a counteracting voice that says he never was invited to a meeting there. So that becomes to be the first step. How cross-examination goes, we will actually be more curious about the questions that come from those who wish to cross-examine him in terms of whether those questions are intended to create cover-ups or to create a huge suspicion in terms of what he has said. And of course, how Mcebisi responds to those questions will be as equally important. But I think the scene-setting testimony that he has given to the inquiry is quite important and quite revealing about the nature and extent to which that the Guptas felt they might have had in influence, which is not surprising because we've had instances of Fikile Mbalula having cried in an NEC meeting that he knew about his appointment.
Although you speak to Fikile Mbalula, he would swear blind that that never happened at this point in time.
Well, he's coming to the commission now.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we'll wait to see what the testimony is when he is called as a witness. You've put together a front-page story in the Sunday Times about how it would seem that Mcebisi Jonas setting the scene for all sorts of allegations falling out of the woodwork at Treasury. Before we get there, Ranjeni, though, like I've said, testimony is one thing, findings are another, and being found guilty in a court of law is something completely different. Why is this going to take so long?
Well, because I think it's the amount of allegations and the fact that state capture became so entrenched right across the state. And the terms of reference are quite broad. It's the National Treasury, and you would see from our story today that they alone, there's so much to investigate in terms of the attempts to crash the Treasury and strip its powers. Now, this happened across the state system. And what I think is going to happen is that because of the type of testimony Mr. Jonas gave, he's opened the front for the National Treasury, and you're going to get a lineup of high-powered officials and Ministers Nene and Goran coming to give evidence. And then I think that's going to trigger public servants across the state system wanting to come forward, because I think what has been revealed through the Gupta leaks, through media investigations, is just the tip of the iceberg, and I think there's a lot more that has to come out. So I think that even the State Capture Commission underestimates the type of information that's out there. But the one good thing about it is that they are saying that they are not looking just at the individual incidents that have been in the public domain for a while, that they want to see if there was a deliberate effort to undermine our constitutional democracy, so that departments and institutions of the state were repurposed by politicians, by enablers, by officials to allow state capture to happen. So that, I think, is going to be quite a task for this commission. And from the questions that Judge Zondo was asking Mr. Jonas on Friday, he specifically asked, I want to know how deep the rot is. So that is going to take a lot of work.
I should imagine so. I mean, if you want to use the comparison of state capture being like a cancer, one never really knows how deep the problem is until you actually discover the few initial cancer cells. But let's come back to the Commission of Inquiry and its effectiveness. Why should South Africans trust this commission, Lukhona, if we've been through things like the Sarita Commission of Inquiry into the arms deal, Farlam Commission into Marikana, a long list of inquiries that didn't necessarily deliver justice? What's going to be different about this one?
There is great skepticism about commissions of inquiry generally. I mean, even the one into higher education ended up proposing things that were quite a flop, and society rejecting those recommendations. So this is a very important thing. But I think the political cycle that we are in is quite a different one. There's quite connectedness in terms of how commissions are appointed, the terms of reference that are given to them, and the scope of work that they're allowed to do. And also, I think, to an extent, the comfortability at which they feel that they can make piercing recommendations. So I think, one, the difference is that we are in a different political cycle. But secondly, there is this edginess among South Africans to come forward and offer information so that we probably propel the country towards a new life of politics, a new existence, a new form of accountability that we have not seen over the years. So, but I think the only thing for me that will add skepticism from the public is the length at which the Commission envisages to do its work. Of course, that's because of the volume of material it must go through.
Well, there's a possibility that by the time this Commission draws to a close, it could be a potentially politically moot point. We don't know what's going to happen in the next 2 years. We're unfortunately running out of time. I'm going to get one more word out of each of you. Ranjeni, if you were the Guptas, would you really be that worried watching things unfold at the Zondo Commission, especially seeing as though you have legal counsel there that could quite easily cross-examine the likes of Mcebisi Jonas, Fakey Mentor, and see them crumbling under cross-examination?
Oh, absolutely. The one important point is that they are not automatically entitled to cross-examination of any of the witnesses. They need to still show how they're going to participate in this commission and whether they're going to pitch up for it. And nobody knows that at this stage. But I think that Mr. Jonas's testimony was at such a high level and was so damning that it set the scene for, I mean, some people think that this commission is there for the purposes of entertaining the nation. It's definitely not. It's there to expose, to discover evidence. And in a strange way, I think it's also going to be a catharsis for everyone who suffered under the weight of state capture in the state system. And I think you saw that from Mr. Jonas on Friday. So I think it's going to be a really important process.
Lukhona, in 10 seconds. President Jacob Zuma, or former President Jacob Zuma, should he be worried?
Well, if he has never been worried in his life, I don't think he'll be worried now. All he's thinking is how does he maneuver himself out of another. Indeed, the artful dodge, as it were. He's always been good at it, and I think he'll be looking towards it. And of course, he has a breather of about 2 years to really worry about the conclusive, because the commission is not going to happen in phases, which probably ideally, if it was going to happen in phases, you clear certain things in terms of political appointments, you take 6 months and you put it aside and then move on to other things. Then he would have a very short lifespan in terms of worrying. But now I think his worries are much more about the other charges he faces rather than the State Capture Commission at this instance.
Thank you so much for joining us on PolitBureau this morning. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have left for the State Capture Commission of Inquiry getting underway. Coming up next, the ANC wants to be crystal clear in the run-up to elections in 2019, so they've appointed 4 more spokespeople to work alongside PolitBureau, the national spokesperson. He joins us alongside Lukhona Mnguni next in the PolitBureau.